Hello, fellow creatives. Welcome back. And we are super excited because this next series of episodes that we're putting together is all about how to develop your documentary film idea.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this series, Steve, because the audience for this is really people like us, other filmmakers who might be at any stage in their journey. And it's not just a one-off, it's part of a bigger series that we plan to run that takes in all aspects of the filmmaking process. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's often really difficult to find this type of information on how to really develop your idea to really get it production ready. So over the next few episodes, we're going to really hone in on quite a few different areas to really help you with your filmmaking.
All right, and today we're going to cover off three things that'll help you get started, which is about genre, about how you work up your idea, and how you immerse in the story world that you're creating.
Yeah, and so let's kick off with genre, because genre is a really important one, because I think it's often when you've got an idea, if you haven't sort of picked your genre, you can get into a lot of trouble because it's hard to know where it's going to fit.
Yep.
But the word of warning I have with it is make sure you pick a genre that you really enjoy watching, because if you don't enjoy watching it, you're probably not really going to enjoy making it.
Yeah, I think genre is really helpful for being a bit of a guiding light throughout the process and keeping you on track, and also making it somewhat familiar to your audience so that they know what to expect from it. So should we talk about documentary genres for a minute? So, I mean, documentary has its own genres, some of them you'd be very familiar with. Music documentaries, for example, have a pretty classic structure. Nature documentaries have elements that we're all really familiar with. What else we got?
Incredibly popular genre at the moment is true crime.
Yep.
There's a lot going on in true crime. There's
So
also
investigative.
investigative, but also retrospective, which is another genre. So investigating stories that have already been and past, but then you're looking back on them.
Yep. Lots of history, isn't it? Yeah, biographies.
Biographies, biopics. So there's a lot of different genres you can choose from, which is why it's really important to really hone in on where does your story best fit.
Yeah, and I think as a filmmaker, you don't need to feel like you're pigeonholed in one genre. Some filmmakers are going to choose to be specialists in their genre, and that's fine. And, we heavily specialise in our powerful human interest stories that we call impact films. That's our genre that we've specialised in, but I don't think you need to feel limited by that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, so I've brought in an example of that from, a narrative film director, Stanley Kubrick, absolute legend. And this is a fantastic book because it kind of goes through each of his films, and it really highlights to me how flexible he was across genres, how much scope he had, and license to make films in all types of different genres. So just to give a few examples, we've got 1964 Dr. Strangelove, a comedy. What's that?
Dr. Strangelove started as a serious drama, but Kubrick found the source material so darkly funny that he changed it to a comedy while writing it.
Is that helpful? His next film was 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of the most classic sci-fis ever. You jump forward in time to 1980, you got The Shining, horror, and like almost all of his films are in a different genre. So don't feel like you're boxed in. There's all types of films that you can make, but it will be helpful as you develop this project that you know what genre you're working in.
Yeah. Once you've picked your genre, you definitely need to move into defining your idea and really working into, what is that idea? What is that story you're going to tell?
Yeah, and for me, there are two streams that are helpful to think about here. You've got unfolding obdoc, it's called observational documentary, which means that basically the story is going to unfold over time and you're going to follow that story. And another really popular stream, in documentaries at least, is retrospective. So you're already working with source material from the past and adding new material to bring, new context to it.
Yeah, and that often involves a really big deep dive into the research to really tell those retrospective stories and really find those new angles that haven't been told before.
Yeah, that's right. So what else should we be thinking about when we're working up an idea?
I think a really big one to really concentrate on is, are you presenting a new perspective on the topic that you're exploring?
Yeah, and that's a really big one to think about what else has been done in that space and what's new about what you're doing. And trust me, you're going to find something new here. Yeah. It is important to do your research because broadcasters, for example, if you're pitching a very similar type of story that they've already commissioned or acquired, they might not be ready at that point in time to run that again. However, you know, looking more generally to the whole big wide world of distribution, your film will be unique, but it's important for you to know what makes it really unique.
Yeah, it's unique, but you've got to make sure it's unique. And that's where, as a filmmaker, you get the real opportunity to really explore the story and tell it from your own point of view. So don't be disheartened if someone else has investigated the topic and done a project on the topic before, because the way you're going to do it is presumably going to be really, really different.
Have you had that experience yourself, where you kind of got into an early stage and realised, it's kind of been done?
Yeah, and it can be a real stopping force. So that's why I'm sort of flagging that, because, you know, if you feel like it's been done before, you're might shy away from it, but that doesn't mean it's been done in the way that you're doing it.
I mean, there's that old saying, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. And, you know, you're probably going to find some stuff that is similar, and it's really helpful to know that in case someone says, well, what about that?
Oh, yeah, because people love telling you, oh, yeah, I've seen that. I've seen something on that.
But trust me, you're going to find your own unique signature to apply to this film, and you want to start developing that signature early, so this is part of the process.
Yeah, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts on how to do the research a bit more, one thing that we always do, which I find incredibly useful, is to talk to subject experts. And those subject experts can be everyone from, you know, professionals working in the field through to a participant who's had the lived experience of the story that you're exploring.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that, particularly if we're talking about documentary. I think it is absolutely a genre which is iterative in the making of it. It is very unusual to know everything at the start of production. And what I mean by iterative is that it will change as you go along. It's going to develop as you go. And actually the raw materials for documentary tend to be things that you capture spontaneously in the field. So you actually need to be open to that process, to not knowing, you know, to having a direction, but not locking it in completely.
Yeah, you got to be curious. You got to really want to learn about the topic, because I mean, you can do so much research and then you speak to one person and they just throw something at you that it was so unfathomable to you that could be the result. You know, we've had this so many times working with experts.
I think that adaptable mindset is really important and actually really exciting. You'll get to a point where you feel really comfortable in that. And I see it like prospecting for gold, you know, in the old gold rush days, you know, when people, you know, were digging holes and, you know, had pans and stuff in the river.
I don't know personally.
No, I mean, you know, the story of it, right? You're trying to find gold in dirt, you know, and it's kind of like that with documentary. You're always just sort of sniffing around for the gold and, you know, and doing things, pointing a camera at things and hoping to find it. And often you don't even identify it until you're in the post-production process. So it's an adaptable mindset. It's really helpful.
So the next thing I think that we should roll into is, how do you immerse yourself in the story world? How do you really get into it? How do you really find that space where you can be creative?
Yeah, this is one of my favourite parts, I've got to say. And actually creating a space is really useful. So a physical space that you can make your own, you know, which is a bit of a shrine to your story world. And, you know, this is going to be different for every filmmaker, but I'll show you an example of, you know, at my home office, you know, I'm working up a project. It's just covered in visual references and index cards and all kinds of stuff, and I love that. You know, it just lets you kind of marinate in the story world. And I've actually brought in some examples, you know, of what those references look like for me, and I think they'll be different for every filmmaker. Is that okay?
Yeah.
In no particular order here. Okay, so this is a piece of fabric, right, that I bought in a remote part of Australia called Arnhem Land. And, you know, it's a unique design made by female artists in Arnhem Land, and it's really quite beautiful, don't you think? And all of this stuff tells a story, and, you know, you could use that as visual reference. You know, we're working in a visual medium here. I could get story ideas that might come out of this, so I might hang that up in the space. Might give me some inspiration. A bookmark that I got in Norfolk Island, clippings from old newspapers, photo references, a book full of illustrations, which, you know, look how beautiful these illustrations are. So this is such a beautiful book, full of illustrations. Some people are very musical, you know, so music might come into it, playing music, having a turntable in your space or a CD player or whatever, and actually having music running whenever you're in that space.
Yeah, so that's a whole bunch of ideas. So getting creative is really what triggers, you know, all that creative process for yourself. It could be images, it could be articles, it could be talking to people, it could be music, it could be, as you've said, actual things that you've collected on the way when you've gone and done a recce on a location, or, you know, there's so many different ways. But, you know, I think if you can bring all that into one space and set up the space in a way that feels really good for you, that's going to help trigger all those ideas as you're going through the process.
So true. And because filmmaking's typically a team sport, it's very unusual for it not to be a team sport. You're going to need to communicate your ideas to your collaborators, because you can sort of say, this is really what I'm going for in terms of lighting or wardrobe or colours or whatever.
Yeah. So that's great. So we've covered off genre, how to define your genre, how to define your idea, and then how to immerse in your story world. And I think what's really exciting is once you've kind of nailed those three things, you can move on to the next step, which is how to plan your project. And that's what the next episode's going to be like. And I know everyone's freaking out going, I'm creative, I'm not a planner, I don't want to plan. But it is so important in this part of the development process. So please come back next week to watch that episode.
See you next week.